DrLockdown, you bastard!
So, this might seem a little confusing, so allow me to give you some context. You might recall last year and the year before that, I was always releasing a bunch of these Skybound shorts. Shorts covering each Skybound comic release and going through them and going through how the universe expanded and changed. It was a nice project and it was fun to do at the time, but you may also notice that I've sort of stopped doing those recently. And why is that? Why did I completely give up on those? Well, simply, it's burnout. I was doing so many of them back to back to back constantly, and I just kind of lost interest. It eventually got to the point where I was like, I don't really want to continue doing these. But why did I get burned out? Why did this all happen? Well, the first reason is the reason I started doing the Skybound shorts was kind of fulfilled. When I started doing them, a lot of fans just weren't interested in the series. They were looking at it just going, oh, it's just another G1 reinvention. We don't need to look at that. Not to mention IDW fans were just not touching it with a 10-kilometer pole. So I kind of started those to get some eyes on them, get people talking. And of course, nowadays, that's not really necessary because the Skybound comics are quite popular. Everyone's going crazy and there are so many amazing YouTubers already discussing it, so I don't really need to continue with that. Second reason, of course, is simply I've realized the way I want to engage with these comics is a bit different. There's some media where I love breaking it down and dissecting every single piece of it, or sharing it with my audience through like a video game playthrough or something. A lot of those make perfect sense. A lot of those, it gives me joy. I've kind of realized that when it comes to comics, that's not really how I like to engage with them. I don't like to push myself and read things just for my viewers. Some things I really like just playing by myself. I think the biggest example of that would be the Xenoblade series. I reference it a lot on this channel, but I never make dedicated videos for it, even though I would kinda like to someday. But really, it's a game series that I like to enjoy on my own terms, and maybe I can talk about that at some point, but not now. And I realized that Skybound kinda took the same thing. I get really excited for many of the series and coming out every month. Basically everything except G.I. Joe. So every month when that comes out, it's like, whoa, this is gonna be so cool. And I go and I make a day of it, and I sit down with a little hot chocolate and enjoy reading it, and then kind of think about it for the rest of the day. Maybe I go to work after that, I don't know. It's not something that I feel I really need to talk about on my YouTube channel. It doesn't give me the same joy anymore. And the third reason I kind of stopped was, well, I just left it too long. Doing it every single week meant I had to keep it up every single week, and I eventually stopped, and then it kept being longer and longer and longer. And some projects, yes, I will eventually come back to them, but this isn't really one of them. This one, I just don't see a point going back to it and picking it up. It's just something I'll happily let fall by the wayside. But that's the thing, I've already got a bunch of extended editions of all of these Skybound shorts that were supposed to be turned into a compilation, extended editions that I never really released. And I got an open spot here. I'm in the middle of working on a massive project that is almost done, but I need something to release in the meantime. And I already released a video just recently doing just that, but I need another one. So here you go. Here's all of the extended Skybound shorts that I still had lying around. It's not everything up to the modern day. It stops off at a certain point, and it's a very far back point. But I'm proud of what I did, and I do want to release it. So I guess enjoy. I want to preface this by stating I am not a G.I. Joe fan. I never grew up with the franchise and I have very limited knowledge on its lore. G.I. Joe has always been an American-centric franchise, and although there are Australian fans of it, they're not exactly large in numbers. Discounted classified figures clogging up TK Maxes are a testament to this, as is the groan the theatre gave at the premiere of Rise of the Beasts when the ending stinger was revealed. Matter of fact, far as 80s fans go, you're more likely to find a fan of GoBots Down Under, or should I say Machine Men, given weird localization quirks. With my stance on the franchise and going in blind, I was not impressed. After fans of the series had constantly been telling me G.I. Joe was more than just military machismo, this book wasn't much else than military machismo. The characterization of Duke himself is incredibly bland. He's just standard American bad boy who stands for true freedom above all else, while the underbelly fights against him. It feels exactly how I'd imagine 80s G.I. Joe was, fun for Americans, but completely banal for an Aussie like me. The concept of bringing the true American against the bad eggs in the government is incredibly overdone at this point, and I expected more from a series that handled its themes far more profoundly. Like, I'm not saying this trope is bad in any anyway. It's just we've seen this over and over again in thrillers constantly. It's not something that gets me excited to read the next few issues. Like, I knew nothing going into Void Rivals, and through strong characterization and an engaging world, I fell in love with the series, as many did. Duke doesn't give me any of that, character or story-wise. I have no complaints with the artwork though, helmed by Tom Riley of Marvel fame. I love how they retain the grungy aesthetic of the Transformers and Void Rivals comics, superimposed onto retro screen tone dots, emblematic of the more gritty take of the 80s source material. In many ways, the colorization and flat tones remind me of the old Tintin comics, doubly so given the locale scene. It's just, I don't think the writing is on the same level as this artwork, especially with how clunky it introduces its nostalgic elements. The last page is really egregious. It feels like nostalgia bait to the highest level, which is a real shame when the other series handled its character introductions with much more care. Well, mostly.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.
This comic was a real annoyance. After being delayed into the new year, it delivered a truly disappointing booklet that just felt like white noise. It was my big chance to truly get into the character, but he has none of the charisma that this archetype should have. Pretty disappointing start to the Skybound comics in the year 2024, if you ask me. When the best thing is the fact that the back cover mimics a top secret dossier, yeah, now you've got a disappointment on your hands. This issue is kind of difficult to talk about because it's bloody brilliant, in exactly the same way as the last two issues. Once the series got its foot off the ground from issue 2 onwards, it really cemented itself as a truly heartfelt and nuanced outing in the franchise. Johnson effortlessly continues the motif of pacifism on the Autobots side and ultraviolence and lack of care with the Decepticons. He outlined this in his streams prior, but this issue is where it really comes ahead. The hospital scenes with Optimus are some of the most poignant we've seen in this franchise. Just as the deer scene before that, and the Bumblebee death before that. You see why it's so hard to talk about this? It's just too damn good! I also adore the relationship being formed between Carly and Cliffjumper. Building off what we've seen in previous issues, it's really lovely to see them form a genuine bond, and find solace in the trauma they've both shared. To people claiming this series is all violence without any point, really? Have you been reading this? Have you actually been reading this? Will say though, I'm not so sure about them killing off Skywarp. I get this ties into the dichotomy between the bots and cons, where one side sacrifices their only source of life to save the disadvantaged, while the other sacrifices to give Starscream more power, but I don't think gratuitous character deaths is the way to go about it. Only time will tell, but this doesn't feel in the same ballpark as the other story decisions Johnson has made. Not enough to ruin the issue, it's still brilliant, but it is something that bugged me a little. Still, between this and the promo for the next issue, it's entirely possible this will pave the way for a redemption arc with Thundercracker, which would be awesome, but only time will tell. One thing I'm seeing a change in is the community reaction. The response to the first few issues was a bit lukewarm, and at times a bit hostile, but now, especially with this mess-a-last panel, we're seeing the fandom really take to the series. Bit of a shame it took a meme to get this series' popularity off the ground, given it's already done so much right, but I'll take it. Love to see it, though it probably helps that Cliffjumper flipping the bird is infinitely memeable. Okay, where the hell was this intrigue back in Duke? Because this shit is fire! Despite being the same author as Duke, it's a much more engaging story, with balls-to-the-wall sci-fi cults and an overall sense of dread. Many friends have chalked this up to the Commander just being a more interesting character, but the jumping quality cannot be understated. The sheer presence of Cobra Commander, merging what I assume is classic G.I. Joe elements with the old Snake persona from the G1 cartoon, is downright chilling. At no point does it feel like the Commander is in control of his situation. He's a master manipulator, and it keeps your eyes glued to the page at all moments. The artwork, brought to life by Andrea Milana, is also pretty good. It's sort of halfway between the grunge of the Transformers comics and the sci-fi insanity of Void Rivals. It's sort of a similar composition of identities to Duke, but the outcome could not be more different. Research reveals Milana didn't have much of a storied history with mainstream comics, being more active in independent continuities, and if she brings some of that steampunk look to the table, she could be a real asset to the Energon universe. Already the art is great, and I can't wait to see how it evolves. I also appreciate that the story is integrating itself into the tapestry of the Energon universe much more than the other non-Transformers series. It really feels like it's building to something, which makes this issue much more definitively required reading. It's kind of surprising this is our first non-G1 story aspect to be repurposed for this universe, bringing the Megatron in the ice concept back in a chilling closing sequence. Just hope it's written better than the Dreamwave miniseries. Probably will be. Overall, I might not have been that excited for Duke, but Cobra Commander may just be my entry point into G.I. Joe proper. I'll admit, now that this issue has time to breathe, it's slightly more engaging than the last one. The new characters they're slowly introducing are at least more intriguing and charismatic than old Army Boy the story focuses on. It's still not gripping me like the other runs are, though. I've done some thinking as to why, and I think I have the reason. It brings me back to other globe-trotting adventures I've always been a fan of, like Tintin. There are two factors that make a spy thriller engaging: the charisma of its protagonist and the intrigue of the mystery. Neither of Duke's first two issues have this. It just substitutes stakes with introductions of iconic G.I. Joe characters, which, again, fall on blind eyes to someone who didn't grow up with the series. It's clear the author loves G.I. Joe, but as someone who instead wants to love it, this is just doing nothing for me. If I wasn't keeping up with all the other series already, why would I read this when I could just go back and go through Mission Impossible again? Or the Bourne series? Or James Bond? Or f***ing Tintin? I'm about 5% more interested in the progression than the last issue, but this is pretty much cementing itself as my least favorite comic run of the Energon universe so far. This issue has the pathos, this issue has the memes, but what really stood out to me was one thing specifically: the downward spiral of violence and, consequently, the escalation. Throughout the previous issues, Johnson has reiterated constantly that Optimus Prime engages in war out of a drive to protect his own. It's seen here. Prime is tired, is burned out. He sees violence as pointless and tragic, yet because he's at the end of his rope, he doesn't have anywhere to turn to. So as much as the memes took to going on the offensive in the last issue, really that reads as something horrific now. There's three things you should fear in this world more than anything else: continuity changes from the bad Lorenzo, not the good one, Scottish wizards breaking into your house over disliking a G1 toy, and the fury of a patient man. This issue is visceral, more so than any other before it. The violence isn't filled with hype, it's a bloodbath. Remember how I said Optimus Prime embodies every other incarnation that came before? Well, this is like if Nemesis Prime from the Last Knight was actually written well. He has a reason to get this gruesome, and me, it's terrifying. Throughout the whole thing, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread, as Optimus became the very thing he swore to destroy. So when that closing stinger hits you, it's not a sense of, oh shit, it's more, oh shit. Devastator isn't just some fan service thrown in, he actually plays a part in the allegory. Devastator is the culmination of conflict escalation. Optimus Prime raised the stakes, endangering the lives of those around him, and in turn he's presented with an insurmountable obstacle, a monument to his broken vows. With Duke, these characters are simply there to get G.I. Joe fans hyped for the next issue. With Transformers, sure, this has that effect, but it's much more than that. Devastator serves the narrative. This may be a Transformers story, but ultimately it's more a story about the consequence of losing your soul to war. Ultimately, this issue horrified me in the best way possible, and March cannot come soon enough to show this arc's conclusion. Also, since reading, Daniel Warren Johnson has announced on one of his weekly streams that artwork from issue 7 onwards will be taken over by Jorge Corona, so I guess that answers one of my burning questions from the extended issue of last year's run. Looking at his portfolio, we might just be in for a real treat. His art is slightly less jagged and sketch-esque than Johnson's, but it appears to be equally visceral. Skybound picked a great successor, and since Johnson is going to continue writing them, I have no concerns at this point in time. Again, going back from Duke to this gives me whiplash, because their tones and intrigue could not be more different. Kudos to Williamson for having the chops to pull off two different kinds of stories, but it's clear where his priorities lie. I really like how we're getting new tidbits of Cobra Commander's backstory. Not enough to form an emotional connection with him, but that's very much not the point. The way I see this miniseries at the moment is like a villain cutaway. We have the main story going on elsewhere, then every now and again it'll cut back to the villain and slowly build the tension. It's a lost art with a lot of modern media, and I think this is a really smart way to do things. Since Cobra Commander holds the fear factor successfully, it's something you can't help but feel intrigued by. I love how it's an absolute menace, both in a slightly comedic way and in being a force of nature. If I had to complain about one thing, it would probably be the gratuitous violence. I get they were going for a horror vibe, they said as much in issues prior to release, but it just feels a bit much. In Transformers, it was pushing it a bit, but the fact the violence was juxtaposed with compassion and empathy means it has a narrative purpose. Here, you don't have that, so it kind of feels out of place, almost purely for shock value. Still, it's a nice miniseries that I'll happily keep up with alongside the others, as opposed to its sister series where I begrudgingly do so. This is probably the best of the 3 issues out so far, but that doesn't really come down to Duke himself, but rather the introduction of Baroness. I'm seeing a pattern with Williamson where he puts a lot more effort into writing the morally grey types than the standard heroes. Every time Baroness was on the page, the intrigue went up dramatically. She's sort of a mirror image to Duke. We don't know what happened to her, we don't know where her allegiances lie, but like Duke, she was betrayed at some point, and she made a choice that Duke very well might make. She shows confidence at times, but also vulnerability in others, so it's hard to discern the true extent of her control of the situation. You just want to see more of her, find out what her angle is, and see how she fits into the overall conflict. Also helps that she is quite the looker, a far cry from the meth-addicted librarian we've covered on the channel before. I wouldn't want to fix her, I'd want to make her worse, and then do worse to me. Unfortunately, I have a sneaking suspicion that they're probably gonna go back on everything built up here in the next issue, in exchange for the standard hero-villain nonsense. With the way the rest of the story is going, it feels like Duke's arc is building to the cementation of the true America, which if that's the case, prepare for the memes. I don't want to see Baroness turn out to just be another run-of-the-mill seductress who's secretly completely evil all along and working for Destro the whole time. I think that's supposed to be Destro. Again, not a Joe fan, I like robots. Furthermore, the other elements at play just feel toothless. Duke is finally confronted by the killer of those who took him in, the one who, by and large, put his journey in motion. Yet it's not treated like a big event, there's no emotional weight to it. Much like the previous issues, things just happen. Not even his PTSD flashbacks have any bite to them. The ingredients are here for a visceral episode that pushes the narrative forward, but it just falls flat. This is supposed to be the climax of Duke's revenge story, and instead, I just feel nothing. Overall, the run is getting better, but I'm just not being given anything to care about, which is a real shame. Oh, it's time! Oh, it's time! Get ready for Void Rivals! Man, you have no idea how long I've been waiting for this. Finally having this spacefaring tale back on the monthly schedule is a real treat, especially given where it left off. There's a danger in overhyping the return of something and getting underwhelmed with the end product, but that thankfully hasn't happened here. Void Rivals returns with all the same storytelling, intrigue, and world-building beauty it built itself upon. One thing new to this series that I absolutely love is its use of cinematic-esque match cuts. There are 2 instances in the comic, and both really help the story flow well. Previous issues already had a cinematic feel to them, but the employment of this technique takes this to even further heights. The reveal of the midpoint of the book with 2 different parallels feels like something straight out of an animated sci-fi film from the 80s. It's really cool to see stuff like this. Not something I've seen utilized a lot in comics. Granted, I'm no expert on comics, but it's still awesome. It's also really interesting that this issue ends up being the polar opposite to last week's Duke. That issue had a lot happening, but it felt emotionally empty. Here, not a lot actually happens, but it feels much richer. You don't even notice that technically this is the shortest issue of the bunch. With 4 of the pages basically being double-page spreads that are really just the same panel, you're basically losing a quarter of storytelling to an establishing shot. You don't even get the Quintesson cutaways. They instead focus on Proximus and the moral dilemma of his release. And yet, it never feels like you're being cheated out of plot progression. It feels like just the right amount of story to kick off the second arc of the run. It's paced perfectly. Either way, Void Rivals is back with a bang, and I'm so glad I have this wonderful space opera adventure to look forward to each month again. My sense of dread from the last issue was far from misplaced, because this issue is both the most violent and the most gut-wrenching. In no piece of media has a combiner been depicted this visceral. Johnson portrays Devastator as what the beast within wished it could do. The artwork really sells him as a horror of war. You can't read this and cheer for the fan service. Devastator is far more horrifying than anything seen in the actual horror comic of this continuity. Each panel is filled with kinetic energy. You feel the force behind each motion, something not even movies and television are able to get right. This is a true gestalt, the culmination of conflict escalation. This isn't nostalgia bait. This is their darkest hour. No issue has felt as hopeless at this, but also, no issue has embodied the importance of the human element more. The Autobots are outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered, and it's only Sparky and Carly that allow them to take the upper hand once more. In some cases, to the logical but depressing conclusion. The previous issues have highlighted that the Autobots are strong due to their alliances, and this is where that alliance comes to a head. but at a terrible cost. Although never uttered once in this entire continuity to date, no series has embodied no sacrifice, no victory more. The sacrifice of Sparky is the perfect way to cap off this arc. Johnson apparently based this sacrifice and the entire story of Sparky on Peter Cullen's experiences with his brother that he lost in war. And that pathos really comes across here. And from a narrative perspective, it makes perfect sense. But it's a hard pill to swallow. Sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest, and it leaves behind a broken world. But sometimes that's the only way to move forwards. I cried with this issue. Twice. Once while reading it for the first time, and once while downloading the files for editing. I haven't read too many comics, but of the ones I have read, I have never cried before. And in the Transformers franchise, the only other time I've cried is the Code of a Hero with Beast Wars. This marks the second time this has happened in this franchise, and the first for comics in general. To say this issue was anything less than peak comic fiction would be a blatant lie. Whatever happens after this will forever be shaped by the decisions made here. Wherever this take on G1 goes, it is forever changed by its human element. Something few versions have reconciled before. Prime lets go of the Matrix with the arm of Megatron, a perfect metaphor for the path he's gone down. But it's a human that saves him, both physically and ideologically. Daniel Warren Johnson has closed off this arc expertly, and left the door open for a devastating continuation. This is a truly brilliant swan song to his run as both writer and artist. I don't know, I just wasn't feeling this issue as much as the last two. It just didn't hit the same way, so to speak. If you actually take a step back and examine the release in a vacuum, nothing really happens. Cobra Commander gets his ass kicked by some mutant crocodiles, gets captured, tries and fails to gaslight some terrorists, and then everybody dies to his bodyguards. Okay, that's oversimplifying it a little bit. They do show his strategizing and mind games, and it pulls double duty as endearing the Dreadnoks as well. But to have it all be kinda useless at the end sorta makes the entire sequence feel moot. It's all build up with no payoff. The issue actually makes him seem kinda pathetic, all things considered. I get that might be a throwback to the classic cartoon, but I really enjoyed how much of a genuine threat he was in the last two books. Here, he's just kinda meek in this one. Oh well, we've got a bit of breathing room in this one now that we've got Void Rivals back. We're not gonna be inundated with G.I. Joe as much anymore. I mean, it's not like they're going to motherfuck. Okay, quick tangent here because it's March and I'm kinda peeved. I thought I'd give these two miniseries a shot and see if they justified the focus on G.I. Joe in this universe. Duke didn't. Cobra Commander kinda did, but it just wasn't on the same level as the two non-G.I. Joe comics. Okay, experiment failed. Guess we expand the Transformers side of things and open up the world properly now. Nope! Two more G.I. Joe series! Seriously, am I missing something here? From all my research with everyone I've spoken with, it's blatantly clear that G.I. Joe just doesn't have the same pull as Transformers or even Void Rivals. They're on the top selling comics lists, but much lower than Transformers is. And that's in America specifically. Everywhere else, some stores aren't even getting Duke and Cobra Commander because it's just not a draw for the audience. I've said this before, but G.I. Joe is primarily popular in America. It's not got that pull anywhere else. You want popularity? Introduce GoBots into the Energon universe. Genuinely, they do better over here than G.I. Joe does. Transformers keep selling out. Void Rivals even more so. The G.I. Joe miniseries remain readily available because fewer people care. I don't need them to get rid of G.I. Joe entirely, but I have to wonder, why are they pushing this so much? Why are they focusing half of the available series slots to a series only one country cares about? It's really the same old tired thing Hasbro keeps trying to do. G.I. Joe doesn't benefit Transformers, Transformers benefits G.I. Joe. I know this is ranty and out of place, but I want to catalog my feelings at this point in time. I'm tired of everyone insisting Joe is on the same level as those other two series, especially when the quality of these just hasn't been up to par with anything else. Maybe these series will do better, maybe they'll bring back the emotional resonance, or maybe they'll endear me to their character. Maybe Destro will go around on a worldwide heist with Gunrunner in the greatest comic of the year. As always, I'm open to these being good, but I'm tired of G.I. Joe piggybacking off Transformers to gain more success. It feels very cinematic universe-y, and it's exactly why a lot of big franchises have me burned out. Please don't do this. I like the Energon universe. Don't ruin this for me. Okay, now that that's out of my system, what we got next? Ah, right. You. Well, let's get this over with. Yeah, I'm not expecting much with this one. Let's just get through with this and move on.
A few moments later.
What the f***? Why is this genuinely good? Yeah, no joke, this issue genuinely had me glued to the page from start to finish, even more so than anything out of Cobra Commander. The stakes were higher, the characterization was more in-depth, and the action was actually dynamic and interesting. I guess the introduction of an underground bunker really allowed Riley to do some interesting things with the action. So unlike the previous issues, this genuinely felt like a proper action movie, or a spy thriller. The tension was authentically there this time, one of the elements that blindsided me. But, like, can you blame me? The previous issues were all kind of boring. All my concerns with Baroness were thankfully unfounded. Williamson was actually able to have his cake and eat it too in terms of her agency, and it paid off big time. You get both the betrayal and the reflection, that nugget of self-realization. They push her right to the edge before pivoting and making the right choice. It puts her more in the Fujiko archetype of character purposes, which is far more interesting than some lackey for a run-of-the-mill sci-fi terrorist organization. Now I really want a figure of Baroness. Decepticon Aiden is probably laughing with joy right now. Too bad all the ones on the market kinda stink. Even Duke's characterization works better, where his grizzled nature properly shines through for once. In retrospect, it sorta makes sense that he's been a blank slate for the previous issues, before truly coming into his own. I get what Williamson was going for, but there are ways to write passive characters in a way that's still interesting, and I don't think Duke 1 to 3 really accomplished that. In issue 4, however, you really feel the rage, the camaraderie, the regaining of trust. And on top of that, the artwork genuinely goes hard, filled with a similar kinetic energy to the Transformers comics. The previous 3 books felt kinda reserved, the most out of the 4 concurrent series. Here though, it's got a real sense of movement to it, beyond just the change in location and new framing of the action. If I had one gripe, I wasn't really a fan of the ending, but I suspect that's more of a me thing. The last panel hits and I thought, oh shit, Cobra Commander, yeah! But then it just turned out to be some robots based on his design, making this another nostalgia bait ending stinger. It's not enough to ruin the overall experience though, which is both surprising and relieving. Honestly, this issue shocked me with how good it was. Seriously, this issue came out a day before I was set to release my rant on the mediocrity of the previous G.I. Joe comics in short form. I debated internally whether I should bother or not, but ultimately I decided if it wasn't out there, feedback couldn't be taken in. And it seemed to be taken well. Amongst the small audience these shorts gather, the feeling appears mutual, but almost as if by divine intervention, King's Comics was open on an Easter Sunday, and with it, Duke went almost all the way to redeeming itself. Not sure why they were open on a Sunday, but I sure as shit ain't complaining. I'm still extremely hesitant on the prospect of half the lineup being taken over by G.I. Joe again, but now I'm leaning more into concern than genuine anger. Funny how sometimes all it takes is one comic to change your mind on such things. Seriously, I didn't think Duke had it in him, and yet here we are, with a banger comic. I guess this one was alright. Didn't hit as hard as some of the previous ones, but it was still a solid addition to the lineup. Maybe it's because the last one was near perfect in bringing the series back, but I just didn't feel the excitement as much here. No disappointment like with Cobra Commander 3, but still, just a decent issue, not a great one. The opening pages do a lot of great world building and hinting at future events, especially with the juxtaposition of time periods. You sly dog, Kirkman, I see you. Thing is, the rest of the issue is really just one big long fight scene. That's fine and all, it's drawn very well and conveys the brutality to a reasonable level, albeit not on the level of Transformers. Thing is, it's the kind of issue that makes more sense in a trade paperback, as opposed to a standalone release. Oh well, there's always going to be issues like that. It's not something to get frustrated over, and I have a feeling next month we'll probably deliver on the goods. It's kind of interesting how this issue technically counts as an unintentional meta-narrative, because both the author and the characters have to deal with the ramifications of the last arc. How do you pick up the pieces in your life after such a trajectory-altering event? Where do you go from here? This one was definitely a weaker issue than the last, but I understand why, and sympathize with Johnson's difficulty in sowing the seeds for future arcs and events. The story is slowly expanding, introducing key players in the Cybertronian arc, and putting multiple characters on emotional journeys. Optimus has a newfound resolve, a purpose, a drive, but his arc isn't over. If anything, it's really just beginning. They have to introduce new human characters, given most of the previous lot are just, well, dead. Cliffjumper has trauma to get through. RC has to take up the position of mentor. The balance of power with the Decepticons has to change. It all needs a narrative reset. We're basically going into a new book. The artwork, debuting Jorge Corona, was pretty good, though I definitely have a preference for Johnson's more rough and visceral look. There's times when the bots can look a bit pudgy and deformed, but I assume that'll even out as they get into the groove of things. The thing I'd really like to see improve later is the facial expressions, because at times they can look really out of place. The human characters are fine, showing Corona's strengths, but we're clearly going through some growth growing pains on the bot side of things. Interestingly, the coloration seems to have a whole new vibe this time. It's rich and vibrant, especially in the nature scenes. At times it even feels Ghibli-esque. It's weird, the colorist hasn't changed. We still got Spencer, but he's on a whole other level now, and I really like it. As for the events that take place, really it's just laying the groundwork. We're probably going to be focusing on Carly going forward, leaving Spike to recover for a bit. And given the developing relationship with RC, I'm all for it. The alternative covers for this issue also hint at this sort of arc going forwards, which I sadly did not get because this thing was really expensive.
Next time, baby.
The prospect of RC guiding Carly past her bouts of rage and grief is easily the thing that has me most hyped for future issues, especially since Johnson has plenty of experience with this sort of thing in his previous works. Plus, you know, it's only the plot of my favorite game of all time, so there's that. Of course, we also get several robot hype moments, but to me, the emotional center hits a lot harder. A lot of the discourse surrounding this issue was all, it was a nothing release, but the Starscream stuff was good. And for me, I don't know, I felt it was the opposite. I'm not saying the shifting balance of power was bad or anything. From an action and catharsis perspective, this was awesome. Taps into storytelling choices they haven't really done since Transformers Animated. And I appreciate the push not to maintain the status quo. The narrative moves forward consistently, but it never feels like Johnson is deliberately subverting expectations just for the sake of it. The Decepticon scenes were hype, but I'm just personally more invested in Carly's story, the ship commander, whatever the f that baby is supposed to be. Ultimately, this is definitely a more chill issue overall, but it sort of has to be, because we're going into a new trade and have to build up those moments naturally, later down the line. Though, speaking of trade paperbacks, I'm actually kind of annoyed at something. The other day, I was just walking around in the CBD, killing time before a gig. I ended up walking into the city's largest bookstore, and while browsing, I came across the trade paperback for Void Rivals. And I gotta say, the quality on this thing was kinda shocking. The paper itself was basically the same as what you get in the individual issues, which for a paperback release seems a little ridiculous. They didn't even have any extra alternate covers at the back, which was stupid. I admit I'm not the most knowledgeable on comic collecting, so this might be standard for most releases. But I compare that to the old IDW trades, and it just seems like a massive downgrade. Obviously I didn't buy it, and I opted to use footage graciously provided by Chris Carnage for this review, but I might have double dipped if the quality had been better. I genuinely love Void Rivals, and I realize these releases were cheaper than most trades on the shelf. But to me this seems like a massive missed opportunity. Might be a pet peeve, and I have these comics anyway, but it still kind of annoyed me. This one was a lot better than the last one, doing a much more successful job balancing Commander's mind games with the limits of what he can control. One thing I loved with the previous issues was the dichotomy with CC taking full control of the situation, then having something not go his way, and you just know he's seething with rage under the mask. This issue brought that back, and I really appreciate it. Of course, much like the Duke issues, it ended on a nostalgic stinger as opposed to an emotional one, a first for this run, but I'll just wait to see how it plays out. I don't really have a lot to say because there's not a lot of subtext to things I can go really deep into, but as long as they stick the landing, Cobra Commander's origin story will likely ultimately be a decent miniseries. Nothing amazing, I don't think, but definitely decent. No, they blew it. Exactly what I was fearing with the conclusion of this series ended up happening. All of that intrigue, all of that grey morality, everything they were building towards? Can't have that! That would have been too far gone from the classic G.I. Joe standards! The actual fight scenes that went down were done quite well, and everything up to the finale was adequate. Having Duke go Revenge of the Fallen Prime on a Cobra robot was pretty cool. I just feel the establishment of G.I. Joe itself could have been much more in tune with modern storytelling sensibilities. Apparently this is sort of what Renegades did, at least according to the Joe fans I do know, but I still haven't seen it yet, and after this run, I'm feeling a lot less inclined to. I don't know, I'm just feeling like I got taken advantage of by reading this, expecting it to contribute to the overall storytelling, or at least give me some emotional catharsis beyond,
"Hey, American patriotism is good, actually."
Honestly, I'm more excited for where the story is going than where the story actually is right now. The prospect of finally bringing Transformers and G.I. Joe together, properly, and not just through tangential references, is at least somewhat interesting. Of course, I'm hesitant to put my faith in the crossover aspects, when Duke and Cobra Commander were both billed as integral to the universe, but so far we've only seen bits and pieces here and there. It actually reminds me a lot of the early episodes of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where all the cool shit would be happening in the background on the big screen, while what was shown in the show wasn't really that engaging. That show did eventually improve, and G.I. Joe and the Energon universe could do well, but right now, that's the vibe I'm getting. Still, Williamson isn't returning for either Destro or Scarlett, and the promo for Destro at the back of Duke definitely seems a lot more interesting than Duke Duke's promo was, so that's a start. I'm not holding my breath though. Regardless, right now, the Duke miniseries is an easy skip. It hasn't contributed anything to the overarching narrative, and it lacks the emotional depth seen in Transformers and Void Rivals. It's currently just a waste of time for non-G.I. Joe fans, and I wouldn't have bothered if I wasn't doing this lineup. I didn't really know what I was expecting going into this. I figured it would be the issue that finally brought all 4 runs together, but given how wildly different each storyline was at this current point in time, I didn't really know how that was going to pan out. I mean, G.I. Joe hasn't even met Transformers yet, Cobra Commander is being a sneaky, slithery snake, and our titular Void Rivals are off in the desert. What earth-shattering revelations can they bring back? Furthermore, I was kind of expecting the issue to be a bit longer than usual, much like the previous IDW annual specials. In hindsight, I don't know why I thought that. Already they're giving these comics away for free. Doubling the page count would be pretty financially irresponsible. Of course, finally giving it a read, me, this is awesome! It basically sets up massive paradigm shifts for all main arcs in the story, and really makes this world feel alive and lived in. Basically, the story is split into 4 quarter-long mini-stories. Well, the first 2 are kind of tied together into one long one, but it ties into both Transformers and Cobra Commander, so I consider them tie-ins for both. The first half does really well with recontextualizing how much of an asshole Starscream is, putting a lot of his sketchy behavior into perspective. Even more so than the previous Transformers issue, it's really channeling the animated vibes. Looking forward to Johnson bringing in more ideas from other continuities. So, I guess Megatron's awakening does spoil the conclusion of Cobra Commander a bit, in the sense we now know he isn't going back to Cobra La in any way, nor retrieving Megs. Whatever, this final frame still looks cool as hell. As for the Void Rival section, it was really nice to check in with the Skuxoid once again. It even got an audible chuckle out of me with the first encounter with Slizardo. Really hope these 2 get more to do as Void Rivals continues.
I miss my wife, Tails. I miss her a lot.
That said, this quarter was definitely more nostalgia bait based. It's cool to see Hot Rod kicking around in space while Prime fights on Earth, but unlike the massive moments from the first half, this one was just kinda okay. I don't know, I've seen these characters so much throughout the franchise already, so I really want to see something emotionally resonant, not just nostalgic. Doesn't do very well to sell new readers on Void Rivals, which is sort of an issue I take with this release overall. The final section, tying in with Duke, would have been quite similar, but the ending recontextualizes the whole run and honestly gives me everything I want. It's almost like they anticipated my complaints with the end of that run and fixed everything? Like, now the army's back to being a bunch of corrupt subterfuge-filled wankers, backstabbing themselves in order to get full control, and Baroness is brought onto the team specifically because she takes no shit.
That outfit is kind of stupid though.
Just not a lot really happens, but they basically fixed all the issues I had with Duke's ending in one fell swoop. Between this and new writers being brought on board, I'm actually a bit more optimistic with how Joe will be handled going forwards. Gotta keep my expectations in check though, because last time I did that, I was just setting myself up for disappointment. I only really have 2 gripes with it, and neither have anything to do with the story being told itself. Firstly, the Transformers portion has a guest artist, Ryan Otley of Invincible fame, and his work is a little bit janky. It's clear his strengths are with organic character designs, because the wibbliness of a lot of the Cybertronians is kinda IDW2-esque in its proportions, even more so than Corona's work in Transformers issue 8. Secondly, I'm not sure how successful this will be in bringing new fans. It's very good, but mostly in the sense of progressing the arcs of the existing story. Still, at least that's better than being a blatant ad. Looking at you, Doctor Who. Regardless, this was a damn fine special, and although I don't know how effective it'll be, I sincerely hope it's bringing in new readers. This one arrived incredibly unfashionably late to Australia, so for 2 weeks I was hearing my friends lab on about how it was the most tragic and depressing issue of the whole run so far. It's not that, it on no level wrecks me on the same level as issue 6 did. You'll recall I was basically bawling over that issue in particular, twice, no less. That's not to say it's a bad issue by any stretch of the imagination, it's still very good. It's another one that mostly involves setting up the pieces for major moments later on, but it feels more deft than the last one. This one definitely has that introspective feel, filled with pathos and contemplation, though we're not at the point in the story where we can expect massive gut-wrenching moments. They'll come in due time, and for now, Johnson's moment-to-moment drama does well to keep you engaged. I love the parallels on how the Autobots are at the end of their violent journey, filled with regrets, whereas Carly is filled with the fire of revenge. It's a good dichotomy and a nice change of focus for the coming issues. This does mean that Spike is essentially out of the story for the time being. I suspect he'll be put on the back burner and perhaps introduced later in the narrative once he's moved past his grief. But that's okay, this choice is likely for the same reason that they kept the cast purposely purposefully small. By doing this, they can focus on the specific character arcs within the time they allotted. Beast Wars was exceptional at this, though that was more necessity being the mother of invention, as CG models are more expensive to produce, doubly so back in the 90s. On the con side of things, Soundwave's leadership style really works as both a contrast to Starscream's incompetence and general narrative conflict escalation. Now that we have someone who's tactically sound, I can definitely see Prime absolutely getting wrecked. I also love how they're reinforcing the idea that Thundercracker will probably go turncoat. I've commented on it before, but now I'm sure of it. Especially when he finds out what happened to Skywarp, here's defo betraying the cause. Corona's artwork is also improving drastically as we slowly get out of the growing pains, but it probably helps he's been playing to his strengths a lot more in this one. The robots proportionally look a lot better, and the artwork lends itself more to accentuating Spencer's color work. He's beginning to work out his strengths, something I very much appreciate. It's clear we're moving into a bigger overall arc, expanding the scope of the story, and I, for one, cannot wait for it. But I guess I'll have to, as they'll likely arrive 3 months after release date. Welcome to Australia! This one was an okay ending for the overall arc, but I think it mostly served to contextualize my issues with the narrative. It does an absolutely wonderful job showing just how deranged Cobra Commander has become, by allowing us to behold his psychopathic tendencies, then hinting at even more off-page that we can only imagine of. It cements him as a truly wonderful villain. Don't show the shark. The less you see, the scarier it is. But here's the thing, the characterization is on point, but for the story itself, what's the point? Narratively, how did this contribute anything? Even aside from the greater Energon universe, there hasn't been any narrative catharsis. There hasn't been a central theme or idea that ties the whole thing together. The one big moment that goes crazy ends up happening in a completely different story, and this one only depicts the aftermath, so ultimately the whole thing feels like a prologue. And the thing is, prologues can be great in their own rights. They can act as their own standalone stories. Unfortunately, this series did not, and ultimately it serves as another missed opportunity to get me properly into G.I. Joe. What's clear with this issue is that we're on our way to a convergence point between the Cybertronian story and the tale of the Sacred Ring. Even beyond the introduction of Springy Boy, everything here just screams, these people are descended from Cybertronians. What purpose they serve, how this all fits together, it remains to be seen, but whatever's on the other side, things are reaching a climax point. There's not a lot I can say overall beyond, it's a good issue, and it was better than the last one, because right now we're in a transition point to what's probably going to be the next phase of the storyline. Things are going to get crazy, but we're just on the edge of that at the moment. As long as they don't pull that liar revealed nonsense, I'll most likely be satisfied for whatever big reveal lies beyond the next issue. And hey, I got what I wanted at least. It's clear Skuckstoid ain't done yet. Honestly, this moment is way more tragic than anything from the last issue of Transformers. We'll be seeing more of him, and I absolutely cannot wait. Okay, I'll admit, this start was a little better than the last one. Yes, a new writer can breathe new life into a project like this. The start of this is pretty similar to the start of Duke. The best of the best in their fields, thrown into a spy thriller out of their depth, with uncharted territories and deadly incomprehensible foes. Looking back at the last two G.I. Joe miniseries, Duke had the engaging storyline, but a protagonist with the personality of a plain digestibles packet. Meanwhile, Cobra Commander had the charisma, but his story kinda went nowhere. Scarlett seems to be combining both, though it's a bit too soon to tell at this point. Still, guess when you actually have a character you care about, the story naturally flows a bit better. The artwork by Marco Ferrari complements such as well, and I'm sure he'll have more room to shine with the feudal Japan setting in future issues. I'm not quite letting my guard down yet, though, because I've been burned twice over already with these miniseries. And I mean, they do that thing where the ending is a nostalgic character introduction again, which is getting really annoying at this point. Maybe it's a contractual obligation from Hasbro, who knows? Again, I'm cautiously optimistic about this series. I'd be a lot more into it, but the previous runs have already betrayed my trust, so I'm not fully invested yet. Okay, this is not where I was expecting the story to go. Not content to rest on his laurels, Johnson completely pivoted the narrative into something far more out there, and I'm incredibly surprised and excited. Yes, I shouldn't have expected the traditional narrative from him. He's proved he always pushes things forward with all characters involved. Here I thought Spike was out of the story, but no. He's thrust back in. His recovery is ready to become a narrative center point. Here I thought the Autobots would slowly work their way up the conflict escalation, but no. Shockwave just waltzes in and wrecks their shit. Here I thought Alita's story on Cybertron was a flashback and things would converge much later. But no! Fucking portal to Cybertron just opening up and shit. We are Dark of the Moon already! Johnson's ride never seems to end, in the best of ways. Though, annoyingly, they bring back the character death counter again, which even at the start, I've never been a fan of. The more characters they kill off, the less impact it has. I didn't really feel much with Ratchet's probable death. He could come back next issue, but at this point it's hard to say. Jorge's artwork is better than it's ever been, really leaning into the chaos and destruction. I think I can safely say that he's reached the same level as Johnson, with his artwork in the first run, though it is funny to see similarities between character models. I'd recognize Magic Square Onslaught anywhere, it gave me quite the chuckle. Also want to say, it's really interesting seeing the differences with the ending stingers. Whenever G.I. Joe does it, the focus is on the characters, but when Transformers does it, it's about the possibilities. Beachcomber showing up is more than just a G1 reference. Sure, it's nice to see, but it also gets you thinking, have the Transformers been on Earth the whole time as well? Could he offer a unique perspective on the war overall? I don't think this is just down to me not understanding the inner workings of G.I. Joe, it's just a different method of storytelling. This difference really highlights why I gravitate to these comics more, even beyond being a Transformers fan. I've seen pandery Transformers media, and this ain't it. Regardless, this comic continues to be the best thing in Transformers right now, and with the story ramping up, I can't wait to see where it goes next month. It's fine, I guess. I suppose it's a smidge better than the start of Duke and G.I. Joe, but it just feels kinda sourceless. Predictably, the cover art is basically a lie. The Transformers really don't have anything to do with the story at all. I think the only real exception has been Void Rivals, which I'm very appreciative of. But it's a common tactic for all the Joe stuff, at least. I'm kinda just over it at this point. I know they're doing it for marketing reasons, so yeah, whatever. Destro himself is just a nothing character. He has even less depth and or charisma than the other three previous Joe-adjacent protagonists. Conceptually, there's no reason to root for him. It's not like he's been wronged in any specific way like Cobra Commander or Duke, and his goals aren't something we can understand or relate to like Scarlett's. He's just some big dumb terrorist asshole who has shit happen to him. I'm open to him having development later on in the story, but right now I just feel nothing. His qualms just aren't something I find myself getting interested in, even imagining his voice as Christopher Eccleston. Really, all I could think of while reading was Scarlett. Yeah, I don't know, rereading it put the book in a new perspective. I'm noticing a lot more subtleties in the writing, and becoming a lot more engaged in the stakes. I honestly wouldn't mind Thompson taking over G.I. Joe proper if it got me this into everyone else. It just feels like a richer story overall, and that's not the queer bias showing through. I'm not so deprived of non-hetero relationships in media that my pan heart soars whenever it's included. Thompson genuinely writes this arc well, though it does have some of the chuds on Reddit getting a bit up in arms. Seriously, not every relationship in media needs to be heterosexual. It takes nothing away from the tapestry of G.I. Joe history, it's just another thing that adds to the diversity of the continuity. Transformers didn't implode after Chrome Dome and Rewind became a thing. It's fine. You'll be fine. Just chill. Wait, what was I talking about again? Oh, right. Destro. It's mid, I guess. Lore dump time! Some of the best science fiction mysteries are the ones where each answer only leads to 50 more questions. This very much feels like they're doing that. It's done very well, both gearing up to greater queries and amping up the action. I love how the interior is sorta similar to the way Marvel Comics depicted Cybertron, further playing into the parallels of the two societies. With the continuity's push into the classic G1 conflict of resource war, I reckon the Sacred Ring is basically a giant energon farm for the Quintessons. Or at least whoever this Zerta Trion person is supposed to be, with two factions endlessly at war with each other, and life being used to charge a great engine. You know, when I started making Xenogears comparisons, I was partially joking, but this narrative is really covering the same ground, from Disc 1 at the very least. What can I say though? I'm very Xeno-brained. It's becoming really difficult to review these issues because they continue to be great in exactly the same way. Great arcs, great artwork from the good Lorenzo, not the bad one, satisfying payoff, they've kept the quality up on these, and as per usual, I can't wait to see where it goes. You know, it's honestly surprising that one of the most engaging spy thrillers I've come across in recent memory is hidden within a continuity latched onto something you actually want to read in an attempt to convert a more mainstream audience. I know I was a bit cautious with the last issue, but after rereading it a bit, I genuinely came to like it a lot more, and this issue is quite similar. It expertly balances both the inner turmoil of Scarlett and the cold, calculating brain power required for navigating spy work. Often spy thrillers have one or the other, but this actually manages to do both. I feel both fully invested in the methodology and the characterization. I must say it, I'm just as hooked on this as I am with Transformers and Void Rivals. Being cautiously optimistic, I'm seeing no red flags. This is some good shit. Honestly, if this were the level the other G.I. Joe books were at, I'd be way more invested in the franchise as a whole. Hopefully, this is a sign of things to come, so they can build on G.I. Joe as a more emotionally rich franchise, and god damn it! Okay, so I'm of two minds about this reveal, because there's a certainty of mid, but there's also the opportunity for good to rise from it. I've made it abundantly clear that I am not a fan of Williamson's work in this universe, overly obsessed with reverence for the original canon and expecting the audience to be on board simply because G.I. Joe is a much beloved series, not realizing it isn't outside of America. I'm sorry, I know that statement pisses off a lot of Joe fans, but it's true. The world exists outside of the United States, and as a context-sensitive series, it just doesn't have the same pull everywhere else. Personally, I'd much have preferred Thompson or a new writer to take the reins, and imbue everyone with emotional depth instead of misplaced gravitas. But Kirkman likely wants genuine fans working on the series, for better or for worse. Tom Riley returning, yeah, I guess that's okay. I like the effect he gives his artwork with the retro screen tones and muted color palettes, but I never found he committed to the aesthetic fully. Maybe he'll use this as an opportunity to double down and refine this art style, which I'd absolutely be all for. But I can't say for sure at this point, as nobody's seen any promos. My problems with Duke and Cobra Commander were never the artwork though, it was purely Williamson's style of writing, which seems diametrically opposed to what I try to get from engaging with storytelling media. However, key thing to note, having a dedicated G.I. Joe ongoing series potentially opens up more slots for other, more diverse stories. They don't necessarily have to be Transformers or Void Rivals related, they can cover any number of stories. My point is, it frees up another slot in the 4 ongoing series rule for another to slip in, one that's not trying to piggyback off the success of better handled storylines. So while I'm completely disinterested in this new run, what it does in the grand scheme of things may be better for the Energon universe overall. Your move, Skybound, are you going to use this as an opportunity or as a crutch? The introduction of Beachcomber is an interesting thought experiment, dealing with the discussion of responsibility versus cowardice. Is he doing the right thing by being unaligned and not getting involved? Is he being selfish by refusing to fight? I'm of two minds on this. To a point, leaving them sleeping seems like a fair decision. But with them awake, he definitely should act upon them. But by the same token, they would be furious at him. I don't think Beachcomber is completely justified, but he's been put into an impossible situation. It all ties into the complexities of war. There's lights of hope in the bad and corruption within the good. It's an interwoven tapestry of personal stories and inner battles, something way above everything else being told in the franchise right now, unless Transformers 1 somehow reaches that level. Beyond that, I love how they're recontextualizing a lot of Dark of the Moon storylines in a more narratively satisfying way. Things like the Space Bridge and Shockwave being an absolute menace don't work because they're a thing we've seen before, they work because they're done in a way that elicits a stronger emotional response. The issue has spectacle, but because it actually means something, because it contributes to personal arcs and growth, it hits you a lot harder. One page of this comic got me way more emotional than the entire runtime of Dark of the Moon, which I know isn't saying much, but as someone with a near unbreakable nostalgia for that film, it's a pretty big achievement. This is why I love this run so much. It uses nostalgic elements, sure, but it doesn't use them as a crutch. Each inclusion works to build the narrative in a way that makes you invested. Things don't just show up because,
whoa, that thing from my childhood.
And what a wild ride it's been. We're on issue 10 and so much has happened already. It's such a densely packed story, and this issue continues everything great from beforehand. I think they've actually done it. They've actually managed to make a series that has me even less invested than Duke. I don't think I care about any of these characters at all. Oh, and of course they have the classic nostalgic stinger at the end too, because of course it couldn't end any other way. The only part where I felt a slight shiver of excitement was a specific action scene that was beautifully framed and detailed. But that's only down to Andre Bresson's artwork, not the actual writing or anything of the sort. The rest of it just felt toothless compared to his own personal artwork. So I'm wondering if he was time crunched or corporate mandated. Some of it was even downright goofy. No, I'm not calling you a good boy. That bluff was shit. Probably categorically not the worst issue we've had in this continuity, but I'ma say it, this was easily my least favorite so far. Please just make me care about this. I don't want to not like things, but you're making it real difficult. Like Destro, this is another issue I don't have a lot to say about, but for the opposite reasons. It's another wonderful continuation of the current arc, though this one's a bit more action-oriented. As such, there's not particularly anything I can single out as being worthy of note. It's just as great as it's always been, and I expect it to continue to be great going forwards. Good to see the different players converging on the Sacred Ring, especially everyone's favorite bounty hunter. My only hope is they don't try to engage in a temporary breakup where they mope around for a bit, like many films do in their third act just to pad out the runtime. It's a trope I really dislike, comic, and I know this series is better than this. I know it's emotionally richer and better thought out. So I only hope they're able to continue the storytelling maturity and not fall back on overdone cliches. And on the topic of storytelling maturity, Comic-Con was over the weekend. And to both surprise and joy, Daniel Warren Johnson's Transformers run has won a prestigious Eisner Award. I didn't actually know these were a thing until recently, but apparently they're essentially the Oscars for US comic book publications. Past winners in various categories include Watchmen, Sandman, Lock and Key, Sin City, Hellboy, and many other prestigious ongoing and limited series. Except, sorry to say, but I actually wasn't completely honest. Transformers didn't win an Eisner Award. It won 2. Yes, for Best Ongoing Series and Best Writing. Honestly, I've naught to say except deserved. Deserved. I could go into detail why all the nuances and emotional depth make this win oh so appropriate, but like, I've spent pretty much all of this video and all of last year's discussing that already, so like, all the brilliance is exposed and ready to see. I just wanted to draw attention to it because it's clear evidence that Daniel Warren Johnson has been doing amazing work, and it's not just me who thinks that. And that's all I got. That's all I've done. Yeah, with it being a whole hour's worth of Skybound stuff, I didn't really feel it would be right popping it in a Doc Takes compilation. I did toy with the idea of putting it in there, and I did try, but it just took up too much of the video. The actual video itself would be like 30 minutes, and then this would be an hour long. And at that point, it's like, what's the point? So yeah, I'm calling this Doc Takes Volume 3.5, I suppose. Just a little extra thing that I can throw in there. Anyway, I hoped you enjoyed all of that. As always, remember, there's a context for everything, and in this context, it's just that I was burned out. So I stopped doing them, and here's the rest of them. Till next time.